boys and girls. Welcome to your third reading lesson this week. This week we are focusing on what you probably haven't memorized. Yes, noticing similarities in our characters across the series. We have been reading Frankly Franny, check please. Today, I just want you to continue working on your Noticing Similarities graphic organizer. You can continue working on your school fair poster. If you didn't finish, definitely use those creative minds and continue working on that. Tomorrow, your Noticing Similarities graphic organizer will be due. So you will email that to us tomorrow so we can take a look at that. So keep working on that. Keep working on your school fair poster if you didn't finish. And maybe we can share our school fair posters in our Zoom lessons. So let me think on that and we'll see if we can get that done. Alright, so in our last chapter of Frankly Franny, Mrs. Miller and Mr. Miller won the raffle and they're going to go to this fancy French restaurant. And do you remember the name of the fancy French restaurant? Yeah, it's Baloo. And what does Franny call this restaurant? She doesn't call it Baloo, she calls it something else. She calls it balloon, right? Because it kind of sounds like a balloon. Right before the chapter ended, they were talking about food critics. And do you remember what Mrs. Miller said a food critic is? Yeah, it's someone who goes to a restaurant and writes a review on the food and the service that they get at the restaurant. And that sounds like a pretty cool job. I mean, who wouldn't want to get paid to eat food, right? Franny is super interested in this job now. She now wants to be a food critic. And also they mentioned that food critics probably have offices, so that makes Franny even more excited. Let's continue reading. We are on chapter 5. After school the next day, my mom and I were sitting on the living room floor making a scrapbook together. We were very concentrate-y, which is why we both did shoulder jumps when my dad came through the front door. I have some very interesting news, my dad said as he put down his briefcase. What? Tell us, my mom said. Maria Cross might be going to Baloo the same night we're going, he said. And then before I could even ask the question out loud, he turned to me and answered, she's the food critic at Chester Times. This was a for instance of when my brain thinks two things at the exact same time. The first thought was, if Cross were my last name, I would make sure the entire world knew it was a last name kind of Cross, not I'm mad at you kind of Cross. The second brain thought made me stand up and ask out loud, food critics are famous? Some are, yes, said my dad. But Maria Cross is the most famous in Chester, at least. How do you know where Maria Cross is going to be? My mom asked. Well, I was in line at the grocery store when the woman behind me took a call. She was whispering as if she didn't want anyone to hear, but she was right behind me, so it was hard not to. Anyway, I heard her say something like, Maria's going to Baloo either this Friday or next. My mom scrunched her face and thought about this for a second. How do you know the woman on the phone was talking about Maria Cross? Couldn't she have been talking about a different Maria? Good question, said my dad. I could tell that whatever he was about to say was actually filled with pridity. I know because the woman mentioned Maria's newspaper the very next time she spoke. She said something like, that's how they do it at Chester Times. I looked at my mom to see if she was convinced. Huh, she said, which meant she was convinced. I'm very smart about whether my mom is convinced. Wow. Can I get there early for a front row seat, I said. Now my parents scrunched their faces at me. Front row seat? We're going to the restaurant, Bertie, not the theater, said my dad. Plus, she also might not be going this Friday. When we're going. She might be going next Friday. They certainly didn't know as much about restaurants as I thought they did. But we still have to be up close so we can hear what she says, I explained. Then we'll know what's good and bad and order all the right things. My parents were silent for exactly 1/2 of a second before they both laughed out loud. That's not exactly how it works, my mom said once she stopped laughing. I sat back down disappointed. Well, then how does it work? I asked. First of all, the restaurants aren't supposed to know that the critic is there because the critic doesn't want special service, she said. Why not? This confused me. I didn't know anyone who didn't like special service. Because a critic's job is to tell the people what to expect when they visit a restaurant. But if the chef puts more care into preparing the critic's food, Then the food described by the critic isn't the same food everyone else gets to eat, my mom explained. I thought about that for a second until my brain decided it made sense. So how does it work exactly? If no one knows the famous food person is there, then how does the famous food person get any food? I asked. The critic makes a reservation just like everyone else. They are there to get their own table, and when they get the menu, the fun part begins. My dad explained, adding, the critic orders as much food on the menu as possible without looking like too much of a pig. Sometimes they bring friends so it doesn't look weird that one person is ordering everything on the menu, my mom said. My dad leaned back. Then when you're done, they write an article about everything they experienced, and then the newspaper publishes it. That is when I got the most spectacular idea. Can we invite Elliot to Balloon? I asked. My parents looked at each other. Sometimes this means they're having brain conversations. Sure we can, my dad said. We'll write a review too. What a great idea, Franny. Which newspaper does Maria Cross put her articles in again? The Chester Times of New York. Oh, that's my newspaper. Remember when I had my picture taken with the mayor of Chester and it was published in the exact newspaper? I reminded them. Since the Chester Times already knew who I was, there was a good chance they put something I wrote in their paper. Right then, I knew I had better write a review I could be proud of. Chapter 6. I did not know it was possible to be nervous about going to a restaurant, but standing outside Balloon on Friday night, I noticed how many moths and butterflies were swimming around my belly. My parents and Elliot were excited to go inside, but I asked them to wait. I had to check inside my briefcase to make sure that everything I had packed was still there. My resume, which had a list of all the jobs I've had, my business cards, 2 pads of stapled together scrap paper, 2 pencils, my dad's old pair of glasses with the lenses taken out, he wears contacts now, and an envelope. I closed my briefcase and nodded to my parents and Elliot to let them know that I was ready. Then we went inside, and you would not even believe what we saw. First of all, there was 100 teen people eating dinner. It was the most crowded restaurant I have ever seen. There were even people standing in the front of the restaurant waiting to get a table. Music was playing, and there was a chatter from all the silverware and china and the sound of 100 teen people talking to one another. How in the world of America was I supposed to review all these? I didn't even think I knew enough words to describe any of it. That's when I got an unusual idea. I turned to Elliot. Do you want to describe the restaurant and I'll describe the food? Elliot's eyeballs almost popped out of his head. Yes, he said. Okay, when we get to our table, I'll give you some paper and a pencil. I could tell that Elliot was very happy. I asked him. His face was filled with pride. When we sat down, I tried to see if there was a lady sitting all by herself who could be Maria Cross, but I didn't see anyone. Maybe she wasn't there yet. 1 centimeter of a second after we sat down, a waiter in an actual tuxedo came over and gave us the hugest menu I've ever seen. They were so heavy that Elliot and I had to hold up ours with both our hands. We were stumpified by the menus. A for instance of what I mean is that the words on the menu were not even in English. They were in French. Another for instance of why the menu was so confusifying was that it didn't have any pictures of what the food looked like. I like seeing pictures of the food because it looks delicious, and that's what I point to when the waiter comes over. I also like it when the pictures has a number underneath because all you have to remember is the number and not some long, complicated food name. Like torta noodly and spaghetti novelli vellisi. Before my mom had a chance to translate the words for me, and Elliot, the tuxedo waiter, came over, and when he asked if we'd like to hear the specials, my mom said yes. This was not such a good idea. The waiter bent down so he was closer to our eardrums and turned his face channeled to very serious. Then he started to tell us all about the different dishes in a very whispery, storytelling voice. He went on about each little thing in the dish, and I thought he might cry. It was like he was talking about his favorite aunt, whom he loved so much he couldn't see because she lived far, far away in Pennsylvania. He told us how everything he cooked and what everything came with, and sometimes he fluttered his hands like he was pretending to cook. Other times he kissed his fingertips and tossed them in the air like he was throwing a real live kiss around the room. His accent was already funny, but sometimes he danced the words around when he said them or stretched them out a little. Like, instead of saying little, he said leetle. The worst of it was that he never stopped talking, ever. Elliot and I couldn't even help ourselves. We were trying not to be obvious about laughing, but our laughing kept making our menus bounce up and down. I tried very hard to think of terrible things so I would stop laughing, but it didn't work. Remember how sad it was when your whole class took a bow at spaghetti lunch and you had to sit all by yourself and watch? But even that didn't help me. It made me worse, actually. Soon tears ran down my face and my shoulders were shaking up and down at how the serious waiter didn't even know how funny he was. How could my parents keep such straight faces? I looked over at my dad, whose lips turned up at the ends into the tiniest, teeniest curl smile. I'm very smart about curl smiles, which is how I knew he was not trying to laugh. And my mom scrunched her eyes to show she was being very concentrated, but I know that she was also trying not to laugh. Then my dad said, "Thank you, I think we'll need another minute." When the waiter walked away, Elliot and I dropped our menus, but instead of bursting out laughing, we just sort of stopped. My parents looked at us both with strict faces. "It looks like this is the waiter. Did you think that was what the waiter was going to look like?" Boys and girls, that is where we're going to stop. I want you to think about what Franny and Elliot just did. They were laughing at the waiter. How do you think that made the waiter feel? It sounds like Mr. and Mrs. Miller might do something about it because the author says they looked at Franny and Elliot with strict faces. We'll see what happens in the next chapter tomorrow. Go ahead and continue working on your character similarities, graphic organizer, and your school fair poster. Let's take a look back at our learning target for today. I can notice the things that are the same across this series. I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe and healthy. Enjoy the nice weather. See you tomorrow.